The world's on fire and we still fall in love. Thank you for the chance to share my joy with you. And if it looked a little interesting in my Zoom square, I will let you know, since we're talking about joy practices, that my dog came in the shed. This is my sparkle shed, is what I like to call it in my yard. My dog came in and wanted to dance around too, which is appropriate because we're going to be talking about joy practices during this time. And I got a dog for the very first time during the pandemic as a source of comfort and joy and getting fresh air for my family. And maybe some of you can relate around animals. We can share in coffee hour about what our joy practices are. But what I want to share with you today, again, as I said in the Time for All Ages, is an invitation to think about the things that bring you joy and the people that bring you joy. Even little things. Sometimes we forget there's a twister mat in our house that we could pull out and play for a few minutes. Sometimes we forget what it feels like to blow bubbles or to just skip instead of walk. I love the moment where my daughter kind of bounces through the screen joyfully. Here's something that I want to share with you about making that video. A couple things. Number one, the day that we did it, I asked my friend, an artist who works with our unhoused and homeless neighbors in Austin, I asked her, how much should I clean up before people come over for this video? And she said, don't clean up at all. It should look like life happens here. And I was so grateful for that. Because in this year and a half, especially of mostly being on screens in order to be with people, we have been especially cultivated in our images, right? All you can see is this little square. And so an invitation to just show up just as I was felt like such relief. And I hope that everyone here in this church and in every Unitarian Universalist church around the world feels invited to show up just the way they are. And that invitation reminded me of a saying that I love, which is to remember this, that we are always comparing our messy insides to somebody else's shiny outsides. We never really know everything that another person is struggling with. And so every chance we get to show what's really going on in our lives is an invitation to someone else to feel accepted just the way they are. Another thing I want you to know is that, did you see those kids putting paint on my glass doors? I left that up for about 6 months. I let it bake into my doors in the Texas heat of the summer 2020, because it reminded me of the joy that had been in my house on that day. And I've been on a virtual, I like to call it a virtual tour of about 80, maybe more Unitarian Universalist congregations this year as a silver lining to losing my job at the YMCA during the pandemic. About 75% of the staff at the YMCA lost our jobs due to the pandemic. And the silver lining has been getting to visit congregations like yours. And I've shown this video and we've talked about joy practices. And what I've told them and what I want to tell you is that it served me for about 6 months to have that visual memory of those people I loved. And then when I was ready, my mom came over and we washed it off together. And it took my breath away, the view of the world again, to be able to see the light that came through. And it felt like such a metaphor for me. There's the things that we cling to, that we feel like we need to get by. And then there are those moments when we feel like we can let them go because they're not serving us anymore. And so with that in mind, I'd like to read to you a quote from the Indian author and activist Arundhati Roy. I'm going to find it. Here it is. All right. And I invite you to think about these words and what they might mean for you now. She writes, historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging the carcasses of our prejudice and hatred, our avarice, our databanks and dead ideas, dead rivers and smoky skies behind us. Or we can walk through lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world and ready to fight for it. I love that idea so much. And the phrase that I have been carrying with me is that idea of little luggage, that we're going through a portal to a new world that we have to imagine together and fight for together. And we're going to go through it with little luggage. And it makes me emotional to talk about it because I know that it's true. I know that we are creating a new world together. Some things we will bring through the portal. You better believe that I am bringing music and dance and friends and community and some mess. I would like to clean my house, but let's be real, some mess is coming through with me. But there are some things I would like to leave behind too. And so what I did with the kids out at U Bar U this week is we had a circle under the trees, under the live oaks, with all the daddy long legs around us. And each one of us stepped forward into the circle and said something we're going to bring with us. And then we said something we might leave behind. For me, I want to leave behind the idea of darkness as negative in my speech, in my metaphors. I'll talk about this in another service later this month with you, but I'll give you a preview. Many times during this pandemic, I woke up in the night, couldn't sleep, and I used to joke, and I still do, I guess, that my dark thoughts, my negative thoughts just needed some time for themselves. And that's why I was waking up in the night. I've never had trouble sleeping before. But what I want is to remember that there's so much beauty in the darkness. In the night sky out at U Bar U, it's a dark sky park, and you look up and the stars, you don't even need a telescope. It's breathtaking. And there's no seeing the stars that way without total darkness. And I've learned in those nights how to grapple with the hard things, grow from the hard things. And so for any of you who have felt like this has been a hard time, depression, anxiety, job loss, financial worry, I lost a family member to COVID. Maybe some of you did too. I don't believe that we should have to struggle and lose people, have a global pandemic, be on the cross as the Christian tradition has it in order to be redeemed. I don't believe we should have had to suffer this pandemic to lose so many people. And I do believe that we can grow and change and imagine a new world through what we've experienced together. And I know as Unitarian Universalists, we are pretty good at naming what's hard and what's bad and what needs fixing, where the struggle is. And I'm grateful. I'm so grateful as a board member of the Texas UU Justice Ministry, as an activist, as a human being living in a world that is so clearly on fire. I am grateful for the work that UUs do to face all of that. And what I want to always remind us is that we still fall in love. There is still love, there is still beauty. The flowers bloom even after the big freeze where many of us struggled. We didn't have power. Austin, it was horrible. I don't know how it went for you in Houston, but it was bad in a lot of places, wasn't it? So, but things are growing back. Remember to seek beauty. Remember to claim your joy practices and to share them with others. It's been hard, right? We weren't supposed to touch. We weren't supposed to hug. We weren't supposed to breathe on each other. At U Bar U, we had 2 kids whose birthdays were on Wednesday. And when they made a birthday cake for the kids, they then waved paper plates to put out the candle because we're not comfortable blowing on cake anymore. You know, we have to rethink how we're going to celebrate, right? But I want you to think about, what is your joy and who are you sharing it with? safely. And to give you a little scripture to go with that, before we do some more singing together, I want to share with you my favorite verse of the Bible. The version of the Bible I use is called the Poverty and Justice Bible. I got this version for two reasons. Number one, I did not grow up with very much Bible. I grew up at First UU in Austin. Bible wasn't really our thing. And as a chaplain out in the world, I want to connect with people of all faith backgrounds. I want to be able to serve the spiritual needs of all kinds of people. And so I knew that I needed to get more acquainted with the Bible. And then I heard that the Reverend Dr. William Barber, the great racial justice activist out of North Carolina, that this was the edition he used. So I said, well, that's what I'm getting, the Poverty and Justice Bible. And I love to highlight books, but this book comes already highlighted with parts that relate to poverty and justice. So I commend it to you if you're looking to kind of grow spiritually in that arena of literacy and connection to the Bible. This piece of Exodus, well, first of all, let me say this. The feminist scholar Carol Myers argues that Exodus might be the most important book of the Bible. And I love that from her. And you're probably familiar with this story. The Israelites are on the long, hard journey from slavery to the promised land. They're in a desert or a wilderness, however you want to imagine it. And so for me, I connect this story to this idea of the portal that Arundhati Roy talks about, that in this pandemic time, we are on a long, hard journey to something greater, and we are going to have to endure and create it together. This piece, chapter 16, verses 20 through 22. It's short. Here it is. After the Israelites had walked safely through on dry ground, Miriam, the sister of Aaron, was a prophet. So she took her tambourine and led the other women out to play their tambourines and to dance. Then she sang to them. It was a gift to my spirit to know that there's a story in here of a female prophet using music and dance and inviting people in. That's a personal thing I'm thankful for. But also in the bigger picture, what it says to me is that all of us, and I believe all of us as Unitarian Universalists, have prophetic voices to use in the world. The world needs to hear our messages, that all are loved, that there is inherent worth and dignity for everyone, that all is interconnected. Our eighth principle that we're adding toward racial justice and multicultural beloved community. We need to share those messages with the world. The world needs them now more than ever. People have been isolated. They are lonely. They need community. Please tell the whole world that Northwoods exists. People need you. And the prophet used her joy practices to invite people in. There's a 2-letter word in here that I want to commend to all of you, as if there are some fellow word nerds out there. I proudly call myself a word nerd. I was a journalist before I was a minister. There's a 2-letter word in here, so, that is so important to me. Miriam was a prophet, so she took her tambourine and led the other women out to sing and to dance. Not Miriam was a prophet, and oh, by the way, she had a tambourine. Not Miriam was a prophet, and they tolerated her tambourine. Miriam was a prophet, so she took her tambourine. Our joy practices are essential to our work in the world. They are essential to our faith as UUs. So I want you to leave with the thought, what is my tambourine? What is my instrument of joy? And who can I invite to join me? Because Miriam didn't just grab a tambourine and sing and dance for people to watch. She grabbed her tambourine and she invited others in. And I invite you to do the same. Thank you for considering these questions with me, for thinking about your joy and your community.